Hello and welcome. My guest today is Andriy Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andriy, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me again.
Let's start with Trump's last diplomatic angle. Trump says he wants to bring in the Turkish president to help settle the war between Russia and Ukraine. Why do you think he's turning to Turkey for that?
I think he's not finding a lot of assistance or people who are willing to work with him from the Western European leaders. They are having a hard line. We, of course, know that the Turkish leadership has been very much in support of Ukraine. Some of their military support at the beginning of the war was crucial, as well as driving a hard line on not recognizing Crimea going forward. I think if President Trump simply is getting frustrated with some of the European leadership of NATO, turning to somebody like Erdoğan, with whom he's had good relations over the years. We know that there was a visit planned at some point for the two gentlemen to meet. Turning to a leadership like Turkey, I think is a win-win for both the United States and Ukraine.
And sticking with that idea, do you think Trump's move to bring Erdogan into the picture could work better than previous efforts?
Again, they've been so adamant, the Turkish leadership, about supporting Ukraine, about not recognizing any of the occupied territories, not least of which Crimea, and also were one of the first countries to say that they would volunteer peacekeepers when the time came. This would certainly be something that Russia would not want to see on the ground, definitely would not want to see them on the ground in Kherson, so close to Crimea. So this is yet another form of pressure that the United States can manipulate against Russia. We know that they haven't been applying pressure on Russia from the very beginning, but just in the last few weeks, we've seen sanctions extended for the next year. We've seen conversations about additional sanctions in the United States Congress. And lastly, not only was there a minerals deal, but shortly after the minerals deal with Ukraine was announced, we saw that the United States allowed weapon sales to Ukraine, as well as an extraordinary sum of $350 million for training Ukrainian pilots. This is, again, all taken together. This is additional pressure on Russia. Russia had not been feeling any pressure. We all saw that the pressure going against Ukraine at the beginning of the Trump administration.
Would you call this a failure of the Trump-Putin negotiation track? I mean, about this conversation between Trump and maybe Erdogan?
I think the Trump team is very interested on finding some wins in their mind, some positive developments. They sent, they picked out Steve Witkoff to be a special representative. They sent him to the Middle East. He was only able to do a small part of his job. His job was to release any prisoners, hostages by Hamas. He was able to negotiate a small release, but the ceasefire quickly dissolved. And even though he's still named as the chief negotiator for the Middle East, he has not returned to have those conversations with Hamas. He was then sent to Moscow 4 times and did not return with any productive peace negotiations. So he is now working in Iran to try to get a deal for President Trump, which would more or less be the same deal that President Obama worked out 10 years ago, but President Trump canceled as soon as he got into the office the first time. So this, for me, this pressure on Russia, but also the negotiation stance right now, it seems as if the White House, not only did they announce that they were ready to move on and away from being involved in the middle of the negotiations, they are simply looking for something to put out that they successfully accomplished something in foreign policy. And it looks like Iran is going to be that country and not Russia and not the Middle East.
Okay, and on the China front, Xi is visiting Russia soon. And do you think this could be part of a push to end the war, maybe with China pressuring Putin?
That's more likely than further support of Russia by China. China needs to focus on their own domestic and international affairs. Domestically, they're worried about their output and production, given the fact that the United States has basically canceled all trade going forward with the enormously high tariffs. In the meantime, China is now turning to other neighboring countries within the Pacific area and extending trade deals with them now that the United States is raising tariffs against them. So China has bigger priorities than propping up Russia. We know that Russia's economy is faltering. The rapidly falling gas prices are not helping them at all. And so, therefore, I think it's more likely than not that the conversation that she will have is that Putin should wrap things up, as opposed to Trump turning to Zelensky and asking him to wrap things up.
But we know China has a big economic problem because of the trade war, and building on that, if Xi somehow gets Putin to back down, do you think the US could ease tariffs on China in return?
I think that is not the focus of the tariffs, unfortunately. We know that in a lot of conversations that President Trump's team is having with all the 70 or 80 countries that he raised tariffs against, that he has mentioned or the White House team has mentioned military objectives for the United States in some of them. That will go towards the European Union and their stance on Greenland. That'll go towards the negotiations with Mexico and what they're doing with the drug cartels there. However, with China, this is a fundamental fight that the United States as a whole, the Congress, the Pentagon, the State Department, as a whole, the United States wants to drastically change its reliance on China as a whole. So even if President Xi has a conversation with Putin and that helps towards into an end of the current hostilities, I don't think that that's enough to change the White House direction on China altogether.
Okay. And let's talk about Trump's reaction to the ceasefire. Trump now calls Putin's three-day ceasefire a big win, but earlier the White House was clearly unhappy and said that that's not what they expect. Why such a shift in tone?
Frankly, President Trump's rating is now at under 40%. He is looking to say anything that is a win for him. And in the next 4 to 6 weeks, as early as the end of May, but probably in June, we will see an enormous economic slowdown in the United States, given the fact that the majority of cargo ships from China have now all been canceled. And journalists across the country, whether you're on the East Coast of the United States or the West Coast, are reporting that there are no scheduled container ships coming in from China or any country that received Chinese parts for their goods to come in. So the Trump team is now preparing for an enormous negative press reaction in the newspapers and on television as to the slowing of the American economy. And that's why you will see more and more President Trump spontaneously saying that, things like a 3-day ceasefire is a win. Anytime he can mention the word win, he will say that. And that is that is not a change in policy from the United States. It's simply rhetoric from the United States trying to boost up the president's rating right now.
And some suspect there is more going on behind the scenes. Maybe Putin promised Trump something behind the scenes. That's why Trump seems happy about the ceasefire. But why does he still trust Putin at all?
Frankly, President Trump responds better with autocrats than he does with democratically elected leaders. He knows that they have been there for a long time. They will likely remain for a long time, that they have an enormous amount of control within their countries, and therefore he does not have to worry. For instance, the deal with President Zelensky. President Zelensky's team was very adamant about the fact that the final agreement would have to be ratified by Verkhovna Rada. This is not something that would be even a conversation with a deal with Russia or another autocratic regime. So he much prefers, President Trump, to have foreign negotiations with autocrats where there is no potential for democratic legislature messing things up for him.
But Trump really can lost trust in Putin, and if we see this, what's next?
I think that we will it's more likely than not that we will see an increase in pressure. The legislation from the United States is ready to go as far as sanctions, the hard-hitting ones that the Senate has been negotiating for a while. We have over 70 sponsors in it. The only issue there is the fact that the House of Representatives, the United States Congress, is still negotiating its national budget. And we are about a month away from any votes happening there. It could be even longer. And so this is an example of when internal American politics slow down foreign policy. This happens all the time with aid to Ukraine. For decades now, we may think that we work for a year on a specific piece of legislation, and all of a sudden there's a domestic American argument about abortion, about gun rights, and that cancels the entire bill. Much in the same way, there are ways of increasing pressure on Russia internally in the United States, but working through the legislature, through Congress, it might take time for them to settle their disagreements on the budget first, and then they can focus on passing additional sanctions.
Okay, we'll come back to the sanction a bit later, but now turning to Europe. Poland's president said Trump has seen reality and could push tougher sanctions to force Russia to disable. Do you think that could still work?
I think sanctions in general are about putting pressure on the entirety of the Russian Federation system. We know that they are rapidly running out of money, that they do not have outside investment, that they require soldiers from North Korea or advisors from China just to move their troops on the battlefield. So it is a poor situation in general for Russia. The more pressure that comes from the United States with further sanctions only increases the chaos within Russia. And I would also add that the announcement coming from Europe just today about the plan to fully eliminate any kind of gas and oil from Russia beginning in 2027 is another form of pressure on Russia to radically change what it's doing or else face future economic terror.
And how do you see the current stage of the trade war, and what's the general mood among Americans about it?
As far as the trade war that the United States started with over 80 countries, we are being promised that there are a handful of countries that we already know had good regimes of zero tariffs: South Korea, Japan, India. However, there is no way that any of those deals will be finalized this year. We have been told that instead of deals, we will have framework agreements, much like the first agreement that Ukraine and the United States were supposed to sign back in February, that will eventually lead to a full trade agreement with another country. So understanding that trade agreements with foreign governments take years of time to negotiate, it is unlikely that we will see those signed before the beginning of the next Congress in 2027. And so it's people are wondering whether Trump decides to keep on the tariffs if no deals are made with most countries, or will he simply remain tariffs at 10% and maybe that's enough? Because we're still paused from the 40% tariffs that he announced back at the beginning of April.
And finally, about oil. By the way, oil prices are dropping, and OPEC Plus partners are ramping up production, which kind of undercuts Putin. Do you think that gives Trump extra leverage over Russia?
Absolutely. It also helps China and other countries who are getting oil from Russia, that now they can pay a much cheaper price, because Russia is already having to sell their gas and oil at a lower price. And now with the global price of oil falling, it's even worse for Russia. It's worse for Iran as well. So the less money both of those countries get, both of those countries are the ones who are using their technology against Ukraine. We know that Russia's reserves have fallen by over 100 billion in just the last year. It is an enormous amount of money to try to recover. It's not likely that that would happen, that they would recover their reserves within Putin's lifetime. So this is really the evidence that Putin has wrecked his people's economy for a generation at least. And whoever will be taking over after the fact, and I fully I fully hope that for the captive people of Russia, that they end up breaking up in some way. But whatever the case is, there's an enormous amount of work that will have to be done to build up reserves in that country, because there's really nothing that he can do within his lifetime to get those financial reserves back up to where they were.
Okay, and as of today, how would you assess the trade war? Is it a win for Trump, or is it still too early to say?
It is not a win for Trump. He started a trade war with over 75 countries. Most of those are our allies. Allies that he seeks to weaken through trade, because he believes that the United States is in a weakened position, even though we have one of the largest economies in the world. Our economy will shrink this year. We will have a recession this year because of his trade wars. And it changed the minds of many allies and other countries in the world, non-aligned countries, specifically in the Pacific Rim area, who will now turn more towards China. They will see China as a more stable and reliable partner as opposed to the United States. And as far as Europe is concerned, Europe will start to develop their own centralized bank and central treasury bond system to replace many decades in the future, but possibly as soon as 10, 15 years from now, to be the financial reserve for the world, as opposed to what the United States has been since the end of the World War.
I saw a funny comment online from an American about 3 steps. Step 1 is leave the sanction. Step 2, apologize, and step 3, hope for they forgiving us.
Right. This is what we've effectively declared an economic war against most of the world, without any warning, without any prior discussion with these world leaders, and they will have long-term effects for beginning this economic war with other countries.
And just briefly, how do you see the war unfolding? Can Trump actually deliver a ceasefire?
I think that so long as Ukraine keeps working with its Western allies, we just had this new tranche of $50 million in weapon sales, $350 million in training announced that the United States will allow with outside funds to go forward from the United States armories. So long as Ukraine is able to keep buffeting its anti-aircraft, its PPO, and its other requirements to defend its territory, also keep extending the range of its drones and keep hitting Russia, where Russia can no longer ignore those attacks. At some point, the economic pressures, Ukraine's very strong military, continuing to defend the homeland, in my mind, there's only one path forward, and that's for Russia to crumble.
Okay, thank you, Andriy, for this interview. Thank you for joining us, and see you soon.